And welcome back. So you can see we're back underneath the truck at this point. And yes, one of my cats, his name is Louie, has decided he wants attention. So he keeps rubbing me in the head and headbutting me. But we'll carry on. You might see him in the shot from time to time. But I got back underneath the truck after we got the started reassembly in the cylinder heads and got the cylinder heads as far as we can take them prior to installing on this vehicle. And if you remember, we were trying to see if we could drop the oil pan like we did in the 6.4 and the 2500 without having to raise the engine up or do something else. And unfortunately, just because of the space limitations in here, and especially with that front differential being in here, because of this being four-wheel drive, they just don't give you enough space to do it. And if you remember, when we dropped this oil pan originally, the oil pan gasket / windage tray, and you can see it right there, it's now separated from the oil pan. I did have to come in here with some paint scrapers and some really long, thin screwdrivers and work it on the edge of the oil pan and separate it from the oil pan gasket to finally get that to free up. Because if you remember, the windage tray / oil pan gasket goes up first, and then the oil pickup tube bolts into a stud that comes through that windage tray, and then you put your oil pan up. So with the oil pan gasket stuck to the oil pan, that oil pickup tube was keeping the oil pan from dropping down all the way. And if you can see that, you can see that we've got significant amount more droppage in this pan. But unfortunately, it's just not enough to do our trick that we did with the 6.4, where we could reach in from the driver's side, undo the mounting hardware for the pickup tube, let the pickup tube fall into the pan, and then take everything out. But from what I can find online, there's really only kind of two choices for this. One is to pick the engine up to get you the clearance you need between the pan and this front differential / axle assembly. Or two, which seems to be kind of a popular thing to do without having to raise the engine, is to actually unbolt the front differential here and kind of just let it drop down and then push it ever so forward, ever so slightly out of the way. And that gives you the clearance you need to be able to get the pan off without having to jack the motor up. Now, we do have access to a cherry picker. It is something I have looked at, but in order to get that to work, because on this side, which is the driver's side, let me scoot over here, if you look at where this brace is at, right here, this brace piece that goes through, which is what you'll see three of the mounting bolts for the front diff mount to that brace. Even if you pick the engine up, you'd be picking this brace up and then picking the diff up with it, which means you wouldn't really gain anything in this case by picking the motor up to get that oil pan to drop out. Because in a sense, again, you've got the pumpkin, basically the front diff, bolted to the engine block via brace, and if you pick the engine block, you're picking it all up. So what we would have to do is hook a cherry picker up to the engine and literally take off. I don't know if you can see it there, but you'll see the engine mount that's bolted to the block itself, and literally take the bolts off of the engine mount to the block and then pick the motor up. And then you'd be able to pick the motor up while this would kind of stay in place, or at least that's the way I see it. Because I see this front differential bolted to this bracket is bolted to the transmission and the engine block, and you just have to remove the motor mounts from the engine block, as well as the bolt that you see there at the bottom, that one right there, which also goes through this mounting bracket which goes into the block. And in order for and from what I can see, in order to be able to pick the motor up to get you the space that you need, now you might be able to, you know, bust your motor mounts loose and pick the entire assembly up to get it to, actually, yeah, even if you pick this up, even if you picked it up as an entire assembly and ended up picking up this front differential, from what I can see, you wouldn't be fixing the problem, because this differential would still be here, blocking you from dropping this oil pan down enough to clear the pickup tube. So yeah, that's the only way I could think that raising the engine up would work, unless I'm just missing something here, is that we would have to, you know, break it loose with the motor mounts. And from what I can see, it would have to be that center bolt on the motor mount right there, the one that goes through it, that would allow you to, it looks like, separate the block from the mount itself, you know, and then pick the motor up from there. But even then, yeah, no, no, I don't think that would do it. Again, I just go back to looking at this brace that you see here. No matter how I look at picking the engine up, unless you unbolted this brace, it looks like you would still pick the brace up and thus pick the differential up along with the engine. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but that's a little bit of long-winded rambling. But from what I can see online, the common thing seems like a lot of people like to do is just to drop this front differential down, at least take the bolts out enough that it'll drop down and give you the space you need. And some individuals will pull the front drive shaft, or at least they'll unbolt it from the differential mount here and just drop it down so they can get the extra drop on this. I'm going to see if I can break these bolts loose. If I can get the drive shaft out, great. If not, I've also seen it done where they didn't drop this front drive shaft off and we're still able to get the clearance. We'll have to try it. But dropping this differential means this bottom brace piece has to come out. So we've got 2 bolts here, 2 bolts on the other side. We'd have to drop this bottom cross piece. You see 3 bolts on the differential there. All 3 of those would have to come out. You've got, it's going to be hard to see, but you can see one of the bolts right there that come through the direction of the passenger side and thread into the bottom of the motor mount that you see there. So there's 2 of them. There's one here and one on the other side. And then it looks like we'd also have 2 other bolts for the differential, just to show them to you here, right there, that also go through the bottom part of the bracket on the motor mount. So the tricky ones to get to are going to be the 2 that are on top of the motor mount. Let's see if I can get up there and get you to see them. There's the other one. You'll see one there, and if you look down a little bit past that, you'll see the top of the other one kind of peeking its head out there. Those are going to be the 2 difficult ones from what I can see. This one on front here, because again, you can kind of see the way they come in from the passenger side and thread into the bottom of that motor mount. Now, it's got to be possible, because I've seen plenty of examples online of individuals doing it. It looks like it's going to take some creative assembly of swivels and various extensions and such to get that out of there. Now, the tricky one is the one that's a little bit further down, that you can just kind of barely see it, because you can't really get a wrench on it. Maybe if you came in from the other side of the motor mount, you know, from the firewall side in. But I was looking at this yesterday, and in order to get that bolt out, I think the best course of action is if we come in here and push our oil pan out of the way. You can see, There it is. You can see that bolt right there. Let's see if I can put my finger on it and show you what I'm talking about. This one right here. Yeah, one right there. It looks like you can come up underneath the oil pan to gain access to that one, but even then I think it's going to be a tight fit. I don't know if a socket and a swivel, my thought was you come up between the differential and the oil pan and you put a socket and a swivel on it and see if we can break that loose. If we have to, we can put a couple bolts in the oil pan just to pick it up like that and kind of, you know, hold it up out of the way and get it out of our way while we work. But what I'm going to try to do, and I'm not going to be able to get you to see it, is I'm going to try to break that one loose first. And if I can, then I'll proceed forward with it, because if I can't get those two broke loose because they're hard to get to, then I'm not going to proceed forward with trying to drop this differential to get this oil pan out, because obviously if those two don't come out, you can't drop this thing, and then we'll have to kind of fall back and investigate about potentially picking the engine up and, you know, unbolting the motor mounts in that brace piece from the other side to see if we can get the height on it that we need. I've looked at this in all data, you know, and all data doesn't mention anything about needing to remove this brace piece that you see here. Again, you'll see it bolts to the back of the transmission, goes forward, bolts to the bottom of the block in that case. So interesting, because all they say to do is just to kind of support the engine on a stand and jack it up a little bit to get you the clearance. So like I said, I don't know, I'll have to go back and look and see how they wrote it up, but I'm going to proceed forward with trying to get what is essentially, let me tap the screen here, you see the threads for that bolt coming out through that side of the motor mount. If I can break that bolt loose and the other one next to it, because they're the hardest ones to get to, then I'll proceed forward with the rest of breaking, you know, these bolts loose, the cross member, the two on the other side, and those look like they're, you know, obviously easy enough to get to. They're right up there in our face, and then we'll drop it. But again, if I can't, then I'll fall back, research it, and we'll have to find another way to lift this engine up in order to get this oil pan out of here. But a lot of people online say it's pretty easy just to drop this diff. But with that being said, I'll talk to you in a bit, and I'm going to see if I can cobble together something that will reach that bolt, and I'll bring you back and show you what I came up with. Thank you much. See you in a minute. Bye. And welcome back. So never mind what I said about coming up through the bottom of the oil pan. Even with swivels on it, it was too much of an angle to get a good bite. But as you can see there, I did discover that it had to be a 3/8 ratchet, because there's not enough room in there to get 1/2-inch hardware. But hopefully you can see that. I realize the sun's glaring you out, but you can see this 3/8 ratchet in here with an 18mm socket. There's just enough room to get a ratchet in there with no extension. So what I did to break this free, and this one did break free thankfully, was to click the ratchet enough, and you can see I could just kind of turn it by hand now, where I could get a section of cheater pipe on the end of that ratchet handle in order to break the torque free. Now, in order to keep from stripping that, because if you do pull down at an angle and that socket isn't on there well enough, you will round out the flats and strip the bolt. It was kind of a two-handed method. So I put the cheater pipe on the ratchet handle like so, held it in this place with this hand, put pressure against the socket so it would stay up against the bolt, and then use my other hand while holding this apparatus in place to make sure it didn't slip. Slightly gingerly pulled down on the cheater pipe handle, just making sure you don't smash your hand in the process, in order to break that bolt free. And just to show it to you here, you can see I can easily turn that bolt now. So that one is nice and loose and broke free at this time. So I'm going to go through and make sure I can break the other ones loose, and then once I get them all broke loose, then we'll get some jack stands in here to support this differential, so that way we could drop it slowly. Also, one thing to note, you can see that we have it unplugged already, but you've got your actuator solenoid on this front axle that engages your other two wheels for your four-wheel drive. Make sure you unplug that, because at least on my model, although you've got slack there, a little bit of slack, once it's plugged in, you're not going to have the slack needed to drop this if that's plugged in there. So go ahead and get that unplugged and get it out of your way, and then you can start breaking your bolts loose. Now let's see, it looks like we've got enough room in the way they've got the hardware lined out here that we should be able to take our same 3/8 ratchet, forgive the camera work, I'll crawl around this truck, and be able to get it on that bolt and break this loose from the front of the engine. Now we got a little bit of an advantage here. Let me just put this ratchet down, and that, remember, we've got the radiator, fan shroud, and everything else removed, so it makes it easier to be able to because I'm actually sitting down under the truck with my head pointed up by the sway bar, so it makes it easy to get the room in here to be able to work. But that's going to be the next one. We're going to work on trying to get that bolt there that you see broke free. The other one was a little bit tight, but you know, I was hesitant on it because it felt like it was stripping out the head, when in fact it was tight, but not like torque tight. So what it felt like it was stripping the head, it actually wasn't. It actually was turning the bolt and breaking free. So it could just be an indication of age, could just be an indication that they vibrated loose, or it could be an indication that somebody's been in here doing this before us. But either way, I'm going to work on getting that front one broke loose, and like I said, the rest of these at least broke loose. And then we'll come out here with some jack stands and some floor jacks and other things, and see if we can get this front diff dropped low enough to get this pan out of here. With that being said, I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So it's been a few days. You know, obviously work and house comes first before we can play. And as you can see here, we've got our drive shaft disconnected from our front diff as part of getting ready to drop the front diff. Now, I've seen this done a couple different ways in quite a few videos. Some drop this, disconnect the drive shaft, and some don't. Disconnecting the drive shaft should give us the ability to drop it down a bit further if we need to, and pull the differential forward since it's no longer connected to the front drive shaft. Word of warning, just like on the 6.4, hopefully you can see that there, they do have blue Loctite on them from the factory, so you will be fighting that. I was able to get them out with a electric 1/2" impact with no issue, and there is enough space, hopefully I can show this to you, there is enough space, as you can see there, that you can get a full 1/2" deep well impact socket on those nuts with no problem. So that's pretty nice. Like I said, being able to go straight 1/2" without using any kind of swivel or anything of that nature, again, helped it make short work of it. At first I was using a small 3/8" impact with an adapter because I didn't think there was enough space at first to get the full 1/2" socket in there, and I just had one bolt that would not come out no matter how many times I hit it. Finally went over to, again, as you can see there, just went straight over to 1/2", and it took it out with no issue. So you know, just like they say, putting extensions and such on an impact will reduce your power, and reduce your power quite a bit. So, but with that being said, you can see we've got our jack stand here just helping to hold our drive shaft up so it's not holding up by its own weight and putting stress on that joint that you see there. And then what we're going to do is just continue to break bolts loose. We're going to get the nuts on the other side of these bolts that go to this cross member at least broken loose, and just kind of get everything prepped so that way when we can get back on this with a little bit more time, we're not wasting as much time, you know, breaking the initial torque loose on the bolts. What I want to show you, and I got to bring it back forward to show it to you, so I'll pause you and bring you back. I want to show you that you just like the pain in the rear bolts we were talking about for this differential, and hopefully you can see that one there. You can see the thread for that one sticking through. That's the rear one that we showed earlier, that there's enough room to get a 3/8 inch ratchet in there along with the socket. It's the same on the front. So the front one on this, which is accessible, as you saw when we were sitting down on the ground, because we've got the radiator and fan shroud and everything removed, it's easier to get to this. There is enough room to get the 3/8 ratchet in there, but so same dilemma on front and rear. You can only get a 3/8 ratchet in there, but you know, thankfully we were able to break the torque loose on those bolts and loosen those up. So far that's been the only true pain, is getting those situated. But like I said, we're going to concentrate on getting these front nuts here at least loosened from these bolts, and then when we get ready to pull the cross member down, take the rest of the differential bolts out, then we'll drop it. What I will more than likely do, again, these are just loose, I'll leave all the main mounting bolts in place, these 3, and then the 2 on that side, and then the 2 on this side, which again go into that motor mount. But the ones I want to take out first are going to be, again, just to show it to you, and that display keeps going to sleep, just to show you that one right there, that one that comes through, and the one on the front side. I want to get those out first before I take these out, because if I start taking these out, and the 2 on that motor mount and the 2 on this motor mount, it's going to put some pressure on those top bolts and make those hard enough to get out, on top of just having very limited space with throw to be able to work the ratchet to begin with. So I'm going to take those 2 out, and then I'll take those 3 out, and then I'll work on getting the side ones out. Now, before I take all the bolts out, we're just going to get an adjustable jack, or maybe even a floor jack in here to help hold the differential up. That way we can slowly lower the diff once we get everything out of the way, and we'll again continue to lower it and maneuver it out of position, hopefully enough to finally drop that rear oil pan. You know, I know space is tight, I know engineers got to do what they got to do to get a design done, but I don't know why it was needed to put the differential so close to the oil pan and make the space so tight that unless you pick the engine up, you got to go to kind of these extremes to get that oil pan out. I'm not sure why they made the decision to do what they wanted to do, but whatever. You know, we're at this bridge, we'll cross it, I guess. And you might be asking yourself, well, why don't I go get the cherry picker and attempt to do what needs to be done to pick the motor up to do it that way? And to be honest with you, even the book states to disconnect this drive shaft and do a bunch of work underneath, even if you're going to pick the engine up. And I also wanted to show, if you didn't have a cherry picker or access to the lift, you know, and you're just sitting out in your driveway like we are here with some common tools and some floor jacks, could you still get this done? So that's also the, you know, the goal of this series, to, you know, see how far we can push things with what you may call the basic everyday tools that everyone has access to. So with that being said, like I said, we're gonna get those nuts cracked loose, and then when we start dropping everything, we'll bring you back. Thank you much. Oh, sorry for the camera work, and welcome back. So in the last video, we showed breaking all these bolts loose. We're back up here at the top of the differential. And if you remember, space between that and the oil pan is pretty tight. You got enough space in there to get a 3/8 ratchet and a little bit of a breaker bar on that ratchet to get that loose, unless you've got a really long 3/8 inch wrench. But the length of the bolts doesn't take long before it starts to hit the side of the oil pan. And if you don't have a 18 millimeter ratcheting box end wrench, I should strongly suggest that you get one because the wrench is, you know, still skinny enough to finish backing those two bolts out and clearing the oil pan in order to retrieve your tool. And I'll show you those bolts here in a second. And you can see down below we've got our cross member taken out. Again, it was just the 2 bolts on this side, 2 bolts on the other, and the cross member, at least in my case, literally just fell out by grabbing it by hand. We're kind of getting things prepped here to be able to take the load of the front diff before we take these final 4 bolts out. We've got another jack here just kind of stationed to catch this in case something should happen to our jack, or in case it decides just to abruptly fall. And again, safety first. You know, jacks are pretty inexpensive insurance. Let me show you these bolts here that we've taken out. We've taken 5 bolts out, what holds the differential in place. We've got 4 more to go. This is the cross member that we took out that we were showing you below. This has got to come out in order for the oil pan to be able to drop far enough to clear. Once we get that differential lowered enough for it to clear it. Again, it's just a good way to keep up with the bolts. That way I know these bolts and these nuts go with this cross member, just putting them back with the part they belong with. These are the 2 bolts that hold the top of that differential in, the ones that are really close to the oil pan, and you can see by their length they back out too far for you to be able to keep a ratchet and a socket in there. But it works just fine, again, with a 18mm ratcheting wrench, helps get those out. These are the 3 differential bolts that on the side of the transmission in the previous, side of the differential in the previous clip. If you saw, these were the 3 that were available, kind of sitting in that same triangle type pattern. So all we have left of this diff to see if we can start lowering it is that we'll take the load up with the floor jack, and then we'll work on getting the 2 bolts right here. Let me point them out. Actually point them out, I'll show them to you. Those 2 bolts there on the passenger side, and there's 2 more bolts on the driver's side. That should be the last of what's holding this kind of front diff in place. Now that I see it, I see a vent tube on our diff. I'm going to go ahead and just pull that off while we're here. There we go. That way we don't have to worry about that one here in the future. That one's done. That way we can drop this thing unabated. And again, just to recap, make sure you also unplug your electrical connector from your 4-wheel drive engagement servo, which is this servo right here up front, and its electrical connector is just right there. Just tucked it up out of the way. So we're going to work on that. We're going to work on getting the weight taken off this diff, undo these 4 bolts and lower this diff, and then we'll bring you back. And hopefully when we bring you back, we'll be able to get the oil pan out of here. Again, this is just kind of one way of doing it. It's one way of doing it if you don't have an engine hoist or a lift or other apparatus. I've seen it done online, which is why I'm trying it here. I did look this up in the book, and one of the things the book also wants you to do is to disconnect your steering column here and just lower it along with raising the engine. And I don't know about you, but I really didn't feel like busting these big old honking bolts loose and dropping that steering rack. Yeah, a little bit of a pain, but I don't know, kind of seems a bit easier to drop the diff, to be honest with you. I don't know, but we shall see. But I'll bring you back in a bit. Thank you much. Bye. Okay, and welcome back. So, slight correction. I miscounted my bolts earlier. These were the 3 that were in that group together on the side. These were the 2 that go through the motor mount that's right up against the oil pan that I was telling you about earlier. And these 2 are on the passenger side and go through the bottom of the motor mount on the passenger side. I was mistaken thinking there were 2 more bolts on the driver's side similar to the passenger side, and in fact there are not. The 2 that are on the driver's side are these 2 that are up between the engine mount and the oil pan. So that being said, we've got all of our electrical disconnected, vent tube disconnected, and it looks like all of our bolts are out, and you can see our differentials actually dropped a little bit. If you look at right where it kind of bolts into that motor mount, this space right up in here, you'll see there's now a gap in there. So what I'm going to do next is take a little bit more weight off this differential, get this secondary jack out of here, which, you know, actually has some of the differential weight on it right now, and also our other little piece of pipe we put in here just as the safety measure. We'll get those two out of here, and then we'll use our jack here to hopefully slowly lower this differential enough and maybe pull it forward a little bit and to get the clearance we need to get this oil pan out of here. So I'm gonna pause it at this point, and then once we get this differential lowered, I'll bring you back and let you know how it goes and if we run into any other hangups. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our front differential dropped a little bit at this point. You can actually see the distance that we dropped it, because there are the 3 bolts on the side. There's the 3 bolts those match up with, and of course the 2 bolts there for the top of the differential on the driver's side. And you can see the differential actually lowered until it hit the mounting point for the cross brace on the driver's side and kind of stopped there. Now, it took a little bit more manipulation, just kind of rocking it back and forth a little bit, but as you can see, we've got our prize. We've got our oil pan off. So dropping it that much did give it enough clearance, obviously, to get the pan out. And what I'm going to do next, and it's just a 13mm bolt, is take that fastener off right there. That is the cause of the majority of our grief when it comes to dropping the pan on a trx4 or a trx4, is that mounting point right there. And a car Hemi and a car 5.7, a car 6.4 car application, this pickup tube is much shorter, and it's only bolted into the pump, which is why you can kind of unbolt the pump and rotate the pump up and get the bolt out. But, you know, like I said, it is what it is. But we've got our prize. I'm not seeing too bad of a result on this pickup screen. I'm not seeing it clogged full of metal, which is nice. I saw a few flakes, and I'll show it to you, but I did see a few flakes inside of the oil pan. Obviously, you know, the cam on this thing was destroyed, so I expected to see a bit of metal, but I'm happy to see I don't see large chunks of it. You can be happy, you can be sad at that same time, because if those small chunks of metal aren't in the pickup tube in the screen here, because, you know, obviously I don't see anything glittering, maybe just one little piece right there I just got off of my finger, and a couple small pieces in the bottom of the pan, that means it's either still in an oil patch somewhere, or maybe the oil filter actually did its job and filtered it out. But this 13mm bolt, I've already broken it loose. Yes, and I didn't take my dipstick out before I dropped the pan. That may be something that you want to do before you drop the pan. It makes it a bit easier, so that way you don't by chance run the risk of breaking that trying to get the oil pan off. So that was my bad for not removing that. You're about to get a close-up view here, because I need to use my other hand to grab this oil pickup tube. But this is the 13mm bolt. There, you can see there, we've now got our pickup tube. Now, you can't see anything because I'm fighting with this. Probably the world's worst video production ever. But there we go, our pickup tube is out. We're going to go ahead and drop our windage tray gasket. We're just going to push it forward. Oop. I actually do see some metal. There we go. Now we're getting into some glitter goodness. It's on the other side of that windage tray. Let's see. Can we get this out of here? Yes, we can. Just gotta get a little bit creative with it. Contorting it a little bit. And underneath here looks pretty clean in first inspection, which I'm happy about. I'm not seeing where it looks like a connecting rod got too hot and baked itself, because you can tell when an engine starves for oil, because you'll see one of the connecting rods usually ends up looking pretty clean, almost like factory new, because it gets so hot it just bakes everything off. But this is actually looking pretty good. I'm happy with it. So what we're going to work on next, since having this differential dropped is kind of paramount to us getting this differential off, is that we're going to clean off the excess RTV that you see there in the corners, clean the bottom of this pan up, and start prepping to put the new windage tray. And I did get a new oil pan, and I'll explain why. A little bit of a frivolous spend, but I figured if we're going through the trouble dropping this pan, I'm putting a new pan on it. It is an aftermarket pan, and I did bend the pan in one spot trying to break the initial seal, because it had such a tight seal in the windage tray, and the windage tray, you know, was being held up by these 4 bits of silicone in each of the corners. So what we're going to have to do is put the windage tray up and the oil pan up. Now remember, part of what we have to silicone is where the front timing cover here and here meet this block. So in order to put the windage tray in and put the oil pan in and do it the way you're supposed to do it, then that would mean we would have to put the front timing guts all together with the oil pump, get that all situated, put the front timing cover back on so it's in place, so that way we could put our 2 bits of silicone up front, do our 2 bits of silicone in rear, put our windage tray up there, and finally our oil pan. And then we'll put a couple of bolts in the oil pan just to get it held in place, let it set up, and then we'll, you know, re-raise our diff and work on getting our mounting bolts back into this beast, which is going to take a little bit of manipulation and a lot of work with the jack. But my plan on this one is I want to try to get the diff up and at least get these 3 bolts here started, because they're going to be the easiest to get to. And then we can work on getting the 2 bolts the passenger side started on this motor mount. And if we can get these started and this started, then it should, by default, we won't tighten them. I mean, we'll leave them loose to give us some play, but we should then be able to get these 2 top ones here, which is going to be interesting because we're going to have the oil pan in our way at this point. So, you know, that oil pan is going to stop right about where that light's at. So that's going to be fun, getting those bolts back in and started and all torqued back up. It's either that, or we can do the little trick that we did with the 6.4, in the sense that we can go ahead and put our silicone in the rear here, put our windage tray, put our oil pan back up, and not silicone the front. And what we can do is we can leave the front, like a couple of sets of bolts out, give us some slack in order not to push down on it, to get our silicone in there, and then bolt everything up. But not quite sure what direction I want to go with it yet, but I'm going to cut the video at this point because this is getting a little bit long in the tooth. But just to show you that we got our prize, we got our oil pan out, and off to the next step. And I'll talk to you in a bit. Bye. And real quick, I'm sorry, before I cut it, I did say I wanted to show this to you. So obviously pickup tube, you saw that from underneath, pretty much no metal, if any, in that, but you know, we will clean it out before we put it back in. You can see a little bit of flakes here at the bottom. Shine a light on this. You see a little bit of flake right there. Hopefully you can see that kind of glistening in the light. Let's see here. Hey, steel oil pan ladle stick. You can see it right down in here. You can see some of those flakes. And those flakes are going to be from those lifters grinding the camshaft to, you know, basically dust. Well, not dust, but flakes. You get the idea. Earlier when I told you I inadvertently bent the oil pan, breaking the seal on it originally. For full disclosure, hopefully you can see that there. You can see that corner, and this was with a rubber mallet, and this is with all the bolts taken out, nothing left behind. This is literally with the surface adhesion strength that the oil pan gasket still had up against the block, and that was me tapping it with a rubber mallet on that corner, and you could see it did a pretty good job of bending that. Now you can easily bend that back to flat and it'll seal just fine, but because I did that, I mean, granted, this pan doesn't look too terrible at all. You can see it over there in the box. We're just going to go ahead and slap a new oil pan on it. It is an aftermarket oil pan. Let me walk over to you and show you the part number. It's put out by Spectre. I've used their parts before and been fine with it. But there you go. There's the part number. So with that being said, like I said, I'll cut it at this point. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider to do so. We're right on that doorstep of that 1,000 subscriber mark for this vehicle. I'm sorry, not for this vehicle, for this channel. Gee, it's been a long day. You can see that all I've been doing is sorry, rambling on. But if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so. We're right on that doorstep of getting up to 1,000 users, and that is the goal. That'll get us our first milestone, and we can start progressing the channel and doing even more and more things. So with that being said, I'll cut it at this point. I'm gonna get a few more jack stands underneath that differential just to kind of help hold things in place until we get the oil pan and everything seated. And then once we have that in place, then I'll bring you back for the next one, and I think that's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and see about getting the windage tray, oil pan, and all the timing components in place. And we may cheat a little bit because I'm not quite ready for the timing cover to go back on. I would rather the cylinder heads went on first. So I may cheat and do like we did with the 6.4 and just kind of hold the front of the windage tray up and in place, and then put the do the little silicone beads after the fact, just so that we don't have to have the timing cover and all that in place. Because without the timing cover in place, you got all this extra room to work with, and it just, to me, it makes it easier to get the cylinder heads in and out. But with that being said, I'll let you go. I've rambled on long enough, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.